Hey, welcome back to another episode. Mike, energy surrounds us. It's just amazing. If we had those eyes that could see all different kinds of energy,
Right.
I think we'd be blinded.
Yeah, well, the spectrum, even things that we know about radio waves and, everything from X-rays and gamma rays and everything, we have very little ability to pick up any of that. Just a small portion of the visible light spectrum and the audible.
Yeah, that's
it.
true. What, 4%? But it is also interesting that we rely on our five senses so much that we ignore our sixth sense.
Mm-hmm.
And today, one of our guests, Stephanie Patel, she's been involved with many different unique phenomena, can pick up energy, not necessarily using the five senses, but she can feel that energy. And it's really a pleasure to have Stephanie back on our program. Stephanie, how are you doing?
I'm doing just fine, and thank you guys for having me on. I'm so glad that you've started this up again.
Well, we're glad to. When you meet people like yourself, it's just amazing all the gifts and talents that you bring to the listening audience. So would you like to sort of update what kinds of things that you're working with now?
Sure. So before, we've talked before, and of course I've had a pretty eventful life. But about 3 years ago, of course, I suddenly became in contact telepathically with what I call the other side. And you can also call it the operating system, the OS we call it.
Huh.
So I've done, over the first year or so, I was learning a lot. And then for the last 2 years, I've been I did a lot of mediumship in helping people connect with their loved ones in spirit. And so I probably did, 1,000 sessions with different people. But lately, I have been focusing on bringing what they have been teaching me forward so that I can share it with other people. And that includes how to emotionally heal. There's a big emphasis on world peace and what needs to happen in order to make that happen in the world. Of course, it begins with each individual. And I've been working with individuals a lot in terms of their own healing. I've also become more active in speaking out about issues, even social issues. So I've sort of come out of my shell a bit, you might say.
That could be a minefield, to say the least.
Sure could.
Stephanie, we seem to be in a society, at least in parts of America, where you're either dramatically for something or you're dramatically against something. And it's very difficult to have...
It's like a nuanced conversation.
Yeah.
You can see a little of this, a little
Yeah.
bit of that, or whatever. It's just all or nothing.
Yes. And so you have a lot of work ahead of you in trying to smooth the rough edges of many individuals that are so
Polarized.
Yes, absolutely. It's polarized. And the thing is that what people don't understand is that you need that polarity in order to define yourself, to find yourself. It's when you see something and something inside you goes, oh no, that you are finding who you are and you're finding your triggers. And what happens in these conversations when people get identified, say with Republican or Democrat, it becomes their identity, and anything the other person says is wrong. Just because you're identified, religion, nationality, it can be anything that you put your identity in. And what happens is we don't listen to each other. We don't listen to what's said.
We just wait for the other person to quit talking so we can talk.
Exactly.
Well, that kind of wisdom, I think you just don't get that wisdom. I think you had some trying times in your younger years that really put things in perspective. If you want to call it that, it was your learning period. I think you had mentioned that. Your learning years.
Yeah, my first 20 years were very, very difficult. And my first 9 years, I lived in Alaska, in a little village, and right on the ocean, the most beautiful place in the world. And they were happy years. And then my father and my brother, 11-year-old brother, died when I was 9, and we moved away. And it was like going from heaven to hell, literally. And so I spent some very, very unhappy years, emotional abuse, sexual abuse. I left home when I was 16 years old and got a job and a place to live. But I was under 18, so I was put in jail.
You were put in jail?
I was. In those days, if you were under 18 years old, you weren't living at home, you could be jailed.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
I wouldn't have thought that at all.
Huh.
They determined that was unconstitutional. Of course, I'm a lawyer, so I'm a little up on this.
Okay.
They determined that it was unconstitutional in the 70s. It went through all the states. All the states started throwing out these laws. But up until then, in the 60s, the 50s, yes.
Huh.
Is that because you weren't going to school, or?
No, I had left home. I was very bright, so I was way, way above. By the time I was in 7th grade, I was testing out at the end of high school. However, in those days, they just kept you in your grade. Mm-hmm. They wouldn't move you ahead.
Right.
And so I got to be 16. I was so unhappy. I was so miserable in my circumstances. And I just couldn't go to school. I couldn't face people. I just was unhappy at home. And so I told my mother I was leaving, and she said, okay. And I was 16, and I went and I got took a train somewhere. I was in North Dakota, and I went to Billings, Montana. I got a job working in the hospital. I lied about my age, said I was 18. And had a little room across it, and I was just starting to be happy and make friends and doing well. And someone told my mother where I was, found out. And I think my sisters got involved, and they called the police, and they put me in jail.
Oh.
Seems like jail would help that.
Yeah, that would straighten you right out.
Yeah, it's the wrong ending for that.
Yeah. So then I went to, I had some more adventures because I refused to go home. They let me out finally. I decided I wasn't going to stay in there until I was 18. So they let me out finally, but I didn't return home as I was supposed to. Oh. And I had some adventures, and eventually I ended up living with my sister in Cincinnati. And I was put in school there. I helped her take care of her small children. She had little children. And while I was there, her husband, who was in his early 40s, sexually abused me.
Oh.
And then when I was 20 years old, I finished high school. I went to college. When I was 20 years old, I was rather brutally raped. And after that, there were a few other things that happened. I tried to take my own life. And that's when I had a near-death experience that I didn't really understand. I just knew that there was no death and I shouldn't try it again, that
Sure.
I needed to get it right.
Did you meet any of your spiritual mentors on the other side?
Well, I didn't remember a lot of it because I wasn't allowed to. I did some memories, came back recently, and they were very painful memories, actually.
Oh, okay.
As to what I was told, because what I was told was, or what I felt when I had the memories come back was, I didn't tell people I loved them.
I see.
Yeah, nobody told me that, but it was up to me to find love. And it just knocked me to my knees, the power of realizing that I didn't get it. But I was sent back because I was told that I had work to do. And so what happened, I had a near-death experience when I was 3, too.
When you were 3?
Yes. I wandered away in the wilderness in Alaska, and my heart rate dropped. You know how kids do, they go. And I crossed over.
Is that from freezing or something?
Yes.
Okay.
It was winter. And I was lost for so long, they didn't think I would live, but, you know, my heart wasn't beating when they found me, but they managed to get me going again. But
So-
I crossed over at that time too.
Do you recollect anything that you saw on the other side that you can share?
Well, I know the story because it's been told to me. And a lot of these were like, my whole life has been very eventful, and I knew it as I was going through it. So it was like the breadcrumbs were being laid, the dots were being laid. And it wasn't until 3 years ago, until I became in telepathic communication with the OS, that all the dots started connecting. So yes, I did meet somebody when I was 3 years old on the other side. And he told me he would come back for me, and he told me he would help me take me back to my family. And he didn't come back for me. And so I would throw terrible temper tantrums and try to tell my family about it and try and take them to this place, this beautiful place, and meet this man. And they would just tell me I was dreaming. So I would throw terrible, terrible temper tantrums to a point where people were just stepping over me. And then gradually I forgot about it. When I was 20, you have to understand, my name was Dorothy. When I was 20 years old, after I had that near-death experience, I knew nobody talked about near-death experiences in those days. You know, this is 1970.
Right.
And I just knew that I had died and come back, and I didn't know how that worked because I'd been raised a Catholic, you know. I didn't know. And I couldn't tell anybody because I tried to kill myself. They already thought I was kind of nuts, you know.
Understand.
And when I came back, though, I moved into a new apartment with some new roommates, and the first thing that I told them was I'm going to change my name to Stephanie. And so that was kind of a marker for me that I could relate back to, because I never knew exactly why I picked that name. But of course, ultimately I would get in connection with someone named Steve, who would tell me that we were two halves of the same soul, or whatever that means to people. And obviously we then had the same name, which means the same thing, which is crown, which of course is the crown chakra through which you have telepathy.
So in those experiences and knowing some things on the other side, and possibly knowing that these things were in your path, how does that help you with forgiveness or resolving these issues with yourself? You know, these traumatic experiences? Yes,
definitely. After I came back, at the time when I was raped, especially, well, both times, but, after the second time I tried to kill myself. But the first time it was ongoing, and I had actually been asleep in my bed. And I awakened to find my nightgown around my neck and my brother-in-law on top of me. And I was so naive. I didn't even, I was just in shock because I'd never had a boyfriend. I didn't know anything about sex. And there was some continuing abuse. And it was so traumatic that if I even thought about it, I would start to shake. I had to keep myself busy so that I didn't think about it. And I knew I couldn't tell anyone. I could not tell my mother or my sister because my sister had little kids, and this was the 60s. And I knew they would make me the liar. And after already having been in jail and...
Sure.
Yeah, you'll make the family look bad. So a lot of things were pushed to the bottom at that point.
Yeah. And I'm not condemning my family at all, because they were doing what they needed to do, or what they felt they needed to do based on what they knew. They were doing the best they could. But they had no clue about the spiritual dimension, and still don't. I'm totally a black sheep loner. But it was when I was 28 years old that after I came back, I guess my heart stopped in the emergency room when I was 20. And so they managed to get me going again, although they thought there would be damage, but there wasn't. I was fine. And I went on to get married shortly afterwards. And then once I was married, it was like I had a protector, and my life changed. somewhat. And so I was able to go on. I went to law school, finished college, went to law school, had children. And then when I was 28 years old, and I detailed this a little bit on another interview with you, I had a very, very, very profound spiritual experience. And that was when I really woke up. It was like, boom, just like that. I got it. There is no death. I mean, it was like it all came together. And it was just like I'd been downloaded with all this information. So my understanding is that if you've had these experiences, you know, there's sort of a cumulative effect where it's easier to break through to the other side. And so that changed the way that I saw things a great deal. And I never was, for instance, with the rapes, I never hated those people. I was just confused.
Understand?
And I was very, very insecure. I thought I was very, very flawed.
That's interesting. Just a quick question. Because you can communicate, because of your mediumship, you're able to see on the other side.
Yes.
And you don't have to answer this question, but I truly believe that when we come down as Patrick or Mike or Stephanie, etc., we sort of have an idea what we want to learn, what we want to do.
Yeah, before you come down, you accept your fate, basically.
Yes. So why did you choose, number one, to be sexually abused, and number two, being a woman, living in a time era where you were not considered an equal, at least with the Catholic Church?
All right. Well, first of all, these things are very, very complicated. I've remembered many, many of my lives. And I will tell you that there is a consistent theme.
Okay.
Throughout them. And it does have to do with the male-female energy and the imbalance.
Okay.
And it has to do with the energy of control, which is usually associated with the masculine energy, and the energy of love, which is generally considered with the feminine. And the energy of love had to basically go into hiding. So I've had many experiences, and I can, well, I'll tell you one. So, and a lot of these come to me through traveling astrally or visions, and I will find myself in a vision. I've had past life memories, for half my life, but in the last 3 years, they've been very much confirmed, validated. I told you about pictures that I've drawn before.
Right.
Some that we even validated from photographs about past lives. My last past life where I died in Auschwitz, I just have all kinds of memories of that. Plus I've talked to others in the spiritual realm, or they've come through a medium to talk about their perspective on it. So at one point I had a vision. And like I said, many, many lifetimes, and many of them have involved the same group of people. So my understanding is that, this is what I've been told, we have a group of 8 souls who are in a pod, if you would like it. And each one of those is a twin. So there's 8 sets of twins in a pod. And you have a tendency to reincarnate. And when you do so, you will find an intense resonance with those who are in your pod.
Is that like a soul group that some people say?
Yes, I think so. It's like a little family. And I guess there is movement between them, but what I know, all I know is that the ones that I have, well, in my past lives and even in this life. For instance, my father in this life, who died when I was 9 and who I was very, very close to, the one person I was close to is in that pod. And my father was born on the same day, they had the same birthday as Steve. One of the things that he asked me to do when I was really, really skeptical of his identity and who he was to get a book about him, look at the picture on the front page and look at the eyes. And all of a sudden I had no expectation of what I would see. All of a sudden I saw my father's eyes, which was a shock.
Interesting.
Okay, so the what I've seen is the progression through these many lifetimes historically of how we left the sense of equality between men and women, and we went through sort of hit the peak sometime in the Middle Ages, as far as my story goes, before starting to come up as far as the denigration of women. But okay, the vision that I saw that was very powerful was I saw myself as some kind of a priestess, and I didn't know who it was at the time, although I know now. And I was holding an orb high above me, and it was like this power orb. And it was like I was dressed maybe in something that you might think was Egyptian or whatever, but a long gown.
Okay.
Holding this up, and there were a bunch of men there, and I'm entering into this vision at this point, and I'm saying, I cannot let you have this power and use it to control humanity. And then I went into this, disappeared in this like colored whirlwind. And I looked up information in the past about that, and of course I'm kind of led to information on the internet that I need to do to connect the dots. And I understood that this was the image of Isis. And I'm not saying that I was Isis. What I'm saying is that I experienced that. And subsequently, I worked with a very powerful medium named Susie, and she would just spontaneously start telling me these things she's seeing, and she saw the same thing. So she would validate the things that I would see, because she would see them later I'd never tell her any of my stories, because I didn't want, I'm an attorney, I want to make sure everything is, that I don't give away the story, the evidence. And she would over and over again validate these things in just incredible detail. So later, I thought, well, does that mean that all women at some time relate back to Isis, which is the goddess of a lot of things, but motherhood, fertility, among other things. And Isis's husband, Osiris, I don't know if you know this story, he was killed. They were twins who became, like all the old goddesses, gods.
Yeah.
They were twins who became husband and wife. And Osiris died, and they cut him up and spread his pieces all over, and Isis went and gathered all the pieces and put him back together. So Osiris is the king of the underworld.
Interesting.
But they're still connected, even though he's dead and she's alive.
Yeah.
Well, one day I was relaxing, and I saw this huge body of Isis. And it was like I could see myself as a dot in it. And it was like all of feminine energy is this body, that is reflected as this body of Isis. And I saw myself as a dot in it, like a cell, only I was moving through it. Like all these other cells are all, the women in the universe, whatever. And I saw myself moving through it, and I remember watching and thinking, I wonder where I'm going to end up. And do you know where I ended up?
Where?
Third eye.
Oh, okay. All right.
And so apparently that's my part to play in the, body of femininity.
That's interesting. Hey, have you ever experienced being able to communicate with one of the individual past lives? Were you able to ever have a conversation?
With my individual past lives?
Yeah.
Oh, many.
That is fantastic.
Many.
Were they other men, women?
Yeah.
You were both genders, I think was what you were both genders at some point. You were a man or a woman, or
right. But the only one I've remembered where I was male, only one that I remember, another one that was told to me by Susie was through Susie, was one I died as a young boy, and another one I was an assistant to somebody. But I would see these lifetimes where within my pod we've reincarnated together. So, for example, one of the big triggers. So through these progression of lives, I had one lifetime where it was on an island, like a Polynesian island. And I'm never aware what's happening. I'm just there, and it's sort of unfolding. And so I walk up on this beach, and I know that to the right, through this jungle a little ways, is this like stone throne, and there's a king. And there's a group of people, and they have a little king. It's still kind of primitive, but they're moving, they're getting their civilization going. It's kind of a point at which people are really beginning to come together and create these structures. And I knew that I was married to the king, and I turned and walked the other way. And I walked down this beach, and I walked and walked until sunset, and I came across a little village that was only a couple huts on the beach. And they were nice to me. They took me in, and I found a husband there, and I had children, and I lived there happily. Well, it turned out, and this story became very, very detailed. I mean, we've discussed it many times, and it involved Steve, and he was the king in that lifetime. And I walked away from him because his head was being turned from serving the people to being served by the people. So it reflected to me in the progression of the way that we have moved from love to control, trying to control others. That was sort of to us, to our relationship, that was a critical point. And I was happy, and he was miserable. He kept trying to get me to come back, and I wouldn't. But then Susie, one day, asked, Stephanie, I see you walking along the beach. And there's a king over there, and you're leaving the king. Oh my God, who would leave the king? So she's telling me the same details, And I'm like, okay, I've heard this story. But then I went through a lifetime, so different lifetimes as a prostitute. I was in a harem in Alexandria. I was a Syrian slave, actually, in this. So there's all kinds of cross connections because Steve in this lifetime was Syrian.
Stephanie, we're almost out of time, and I'd like to pursue this in another segment with you because you have that feeling. What would you like people to contact you? How can you help people?
Well, what I've been taught through my contacts with the other side is how to work with people to help them clear away it's really blocked energy, it's blocked emotion, to help them be able to clear those emotional blocks so they can live with more vitality, more, happiness, more joy in life, and learn to handle the emotions as they come up so that they aren't laid low, if that makes sense. So they've trained me very carefully through, and I've had to go through many, many lessons to understand how this works.
Understand. Stephanie, I unfortunately we're out of time. Mm-hmm. You can find Stephanie at stephaniepatel.com.
Right.
And look down below where we have the description is her contact information. Stephanie, I hope that we can talk very soon again because you are a wealth of understanding.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for having me on. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Well, great. We really appreciate you. Mike, another fantastic guest, and I really appreciate
Looking forward to the
Stephanie.
next one with her.
Yes.
And everyone out there, thanks for watching another episode, and we'll be back soon.
Thank you.